Hi, my name's Amanda Foxon-Hill and this is Suddenly Autistic. It's my vlog where I am disclosing the journey that I'm going on as a late diagnosed autistic adult. So I got my diagnosis at 46 or 47, I can't quite remember. I'm nearly 50 now. So there's been a lot of life before knowing essentially who I was, and that's what I'm processing. This is the second part of a two-part series that I've made, which is called Masking and Other Behavioural Management Strategies. So this is part 2. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, it might be a good idea to go and look at that, and I'll put a link wherever. I don't know, maybe I can put something in the screen somewhere, maybe that would be good. If you haven't seen that and you don't really want to, that's okay. I'll do a very quick overview here, and that's the first video is where I really lent into and examined my relationship with masking. This is going to be when I look at behavioural management strategies in general. So how do we learn how to behave? How do we become who we are? How does this happen? You know, so I'm going to dig into that a bit more here. If that sounds like the sort of content that you like, then I have reluctantly joined the crew of people saying, follow me and subscribe and keep watching, because that's the way the algorithm works, and it is the one concession that I am making to my content, because I really do want this content to get out to people who don't want to feel so alone. So the reason I'm doing this is because for so long, for such a big part, I mean two life sentences plus interest really, I have been walking around the world as autistic and not knowing it, and that comes with consequences. And for me, it's strengthened my generalized anxiety disorder and my complex PTSD. I also had a prior diagnosis of ADHD, which came in my early 40s. So there's a whole basket load of stuff there, some of which is neurodevelopmental, which is not a disorder or a disease or a bad thing, it's me, and others which are trauma related and complex in nature, and that are really damaging my physical and psychological health. So I've got a lot of motivation to remove those diagnoses from my suite of things that make me me. I'm not there yet. So I still have symptoms and problems with my anxiety, and I still have symptoms and problems with my PTSD and being triggered, and making these videos really helps me work through that. So anyway, that's that. Let's do a quick recap of what masking is and what was in the first video, and then I'll move on to this second one. So I mentioned in the last video that masking is a behavioural management strategy learned by some autistic people consciously or unconsciously to appear non-autistic in order to blend in and be more acceptable to society, and that it can happen in any situation, but it often doesn't happen so much, or the mask can drop at home or when we're in a safe place. And I discussed about that. And then I went through some simple or common examples of masking and where it happens, and I also mentioned why I say masking and masking. So if you want to know the origin of that, go to the first video. And this is things like eye contact, mirroring, you know, stopping flapping the hands, and I'm a big hand flapper or a big mover and a shaker, fighting back your natural reaction to pull away when someone unexpectedly touches you, scripting and planning conversations, and then dressing to fit in. So I talked about all of those, and in while I'm voicing over this, I'm going to you'll see, or you will have seen, some slides about my responses to those. I came to the conclusion that masking wasn't particularly right for me as a behavioural management strategy, but there's definitely behavioural management going on in me. I'm not just letting rip and being woohoo, the wild, you know, the wild self, the wild woman of the north, or whatever it is, or the south now because I've moved south. So I do modify my behaviour. So how does that happen, and how does that impact on me and my sense of self, and also my mental and physical health? And that's what we're talking about now. So thanks for making it this far. I questioned whether I was people-pleasing, fawning, or masking, or something else, and that brings me on to what all those things are, and this whole topic of behavioural management and behavioural management strategies. Just the last thing before I go into that, I will say that I'm not qualified to talk about this. I'm not here to give you a psychology essay or be a psychiatrist or where in the brain is this happening. What I am is somebody with lived experience. I am a professional scientist, so I am a qualified scientist. I'm also a qualified teacher of high school science. So I do have some strengths in research, I'm a very curious person. I have a particularly very high IQ in pattern spotting, which is not uncommon for us autistic people, but I'm also quite low in some other areas, or at least have been. So there are things in this that might resonate with you, and there's other things that you're not quite sure. That is the way it is when you're telling a personal story. And remember, this is me personally. This is my personal journey, and I'm trying my best to bring some objectivity and critique, the whys, and ask myself, do that SWOT analysis of myself, but I'm not a professional looking in. There is no substitute for that. However, there's lots of professionals out there who, for whatever reason, are not accessible, or when you do access them, do not quite get you. So learning some of the skills or applying some of that, introspection is not always a bad thing. And it is especially important for people who've been told they're overthinkers and they think too much, let it go, move on. Why are you still doing that? It's really important to know that if it matters to you, it's important, it matters. This could be your life's work, figuring yourself out. I'm telling you that, but I'm also telling me that. This is not wasting my time. This is not navel gazing. This is making me a better person for other people. This is making me a healthier person for society, so I'm less of a burden, not taking your tax money on having a heart attack and stuff. And this is also me showing up more authentically for myself and my family, my children, my partner, my circle. So it's very, very valuable. It's probably the most valuable thing I've ever done, regardless to how many likes or views or shares I get. That's nice to help other people. It really is nice, but it's secondary to helping myself become less of a burden to myself and as a consequence to others. So behavioural management. Both masking and people planning, I'm reading this, so I will read wrong because reading is a different skill set to just talking. Both masking and people pleasing are adaptive behavioural responses. There are many ways in which we learn how to behave. So I very briefly introduced this concept of people pleasing, and I will explain it a little bit more here, as well as I'll explain another thing that happens, which is called conditioning. So we're going to really dig into conditioning, people pleasing, and put it in that with the masking. So how are these similar? How are they different? Where does it come from? So in terms of behaviour management, we come into this world with potential, with personality. I've had 2 babies who are now older, and I can tell you from living that life experience that both babies in the womb and outside of the womb had personalities that were different from each other, different from me, different from my husband, and they've remained that way. So we're now a family of 4 individuals with our own inner and outer world and way of doing things, and while we share similarities and we share a history together, we're not the same person. And it's definitely not right for me to assume things about my now adult children without asking them, because I don't know how they feel. I have to be curious and ask them, and I can't assume to know. Just because I knew them as a baby doesn't mean I know them now. So there's a lot of that going on too. But behavioural, from the day dot, we are programmed, I guess, is the way it is, to keep ourselves safe. And some of us keep ourselves safe by building very strong social bonds, and others keep ourselves safe by not building so many of those. I'm an introvert as well as being autistic. I am self-confident, so people have in the past thought that I was more of an A-type dominant personality, or very extroverted, but I'm not at all. I'm also asocial, I guess you'd call it, or an autistic or an autonomous person. I like my own company, I thrive in my own company, and my need for social contact is very low compared to other people. There was no better experimental condition than what we had during COVID, when I was amazingly more healthy than I am when there's societal demands put on me. Working and being out and going outside and shopping and all of that sort of thing is not something that I find comes easy to me. I am not scared of social situations. I am quite confident in my own being, but my emotions, my sensory, my battery gets drained very quickly from being in those intense outside sensory environments. I can go outside in the forest, and I do nearly every day. We live in the forest. It's fantastic. So, and I mean, I had to sort of brighten the background here because I can focus on the background there, and you can sort of see a bit of the forest, but then it makes me darkened and a bit in the shadow. So I've chosen to do it the other way round, but you can see it's beautiful out there, and that's banking onto our neighbours. It's not even like where the forest is a few more 100 metres away, but it's beautiful around here. Back in the light. So from day dot, we're learning how to behave, but we're also learning from our own individual perspective and our own motivations. So we don't come out as blank slates and then we get scripted and designed by other people. We can push and pull against different things, and we cotton onto and we attach to different styles. So we respond in an uneven way to different behavioural management styles, depending on how it fits with our concept of self, our personality, our own values, and all of this is developing. So the outside world is acting on us. We are taking and evaluating that and taking what we need and discarding what we don't need sometimes, and other times we're not really sure, so we might take it all in or adopt behavioural standards because of what we're exposed to by a sort of osmosis situation where it just seeps in and we didn't really notice, we didn't consciously choose it or question it. So there's lots of things going on, and we're not doing this in a vacuum on our own, we're doing this in society. As I'm sure I'm talking to the converted, you all know that. What am I waffling on about? Here are some main ways that we might be explicitly taught how to behave. So there's role modelling, and role modelling can be skilled or unskilled. So role modelling is a tactic or a group of behaviours that some external person might use to help encourage and teach me how to behave as a young child or as an adult. It's important to note that the person teaching or trying to teach, or in that role as a teacher, can be skilled or unskilled, and they can have altruistic or they can have generous or selfish motivations in that. So there's layers upon layers within these structures. Now, as somebody who now knows I'm autistic, role modelling I know is not an easy thing for me to follow because of the nuances and complications of me and how I work. It's really hard for me to follow them because I'm not wired that way. So what might seem obvious and natural and logical to some other person is completely alien to me. And indeed, role modelling is one of the ways that I have been traumatised over time, because it actually exaggerates the difference between me and others, especially knowing that I have this quite a big computer in my head and that I'm quite an intelligent person. And even something as simple as, say, learning how to tie shoes, which is a big one that comes up for me, it imprinted in my head as a very difficult thing to learn and a very, very shaming situation. But being shown how to do it didn't help me, and it still doesn't help me. My husband didn't teach me how to tie shoes, but when I watch him do it now, I can't do it that way. So no amount of me watching people do something as simple as that in one way that doesn't work for my brain is going to make me learn that skill. And it's also likely to have me question my own sense of self, my own sanity, my own capacity to do anything, and my own worth as a human being. That isn't a given. Some people won't have that, but that's my journey, that's what I had. There's also then reinforcement, which again can be positive or negative, and it's a strategy that increases the likelihood of a behaviour. So an example might be gaining a reward for something or reducing distractions. So positive reinforcement, you clean the house, you do the washing, and a positive reinforcement as an adult might be you go out and treat yourself to a coffee or an extra long bird watching walk, or you have the next day off, or you just sit there and enjoy the clean space. It could be something like that. So you're reinforcing, how good is this? You're noticing the benefits of it and you're really relishing that, and that then motivates you to keep the good, what you perceive as the good, or the target, I should say. I shouldn't judge it, the target behaviour. Then there's punishment, which is removing or restricting options to decrease the likelihood of a behaviour. The big one we see of that is curfews. So when we're going through those teenage years and perhaps we're a little bit older and we're wanting to stay out late and then we miss curfew, we may then be punished by having the privilege of being allowed out late taken away from us, because there is a judgment at that time that you either don't respect the rules of the family, or you're not capable of, you don't have that insight to keep yourself in alignment with the rules, so that decision is taken off you by removing a privilege, by removing something. How do I feel about that? Well, look, you know, sometimes that would be logical, and I think that's fair, but and generally I suppose it depends on how you feel about yourself, whether you then think the person punishing you is justified and you were bad because you know you were and it's just the way it was, or you felt like you did the right thing and they were being overly harsh. So you can, again, all of these, they call us to question ourselves and to think about things ourselves, and different people will self-reflect on all of these behavioural management strategies in different ways to different levels, and it's all okay unless it causes things like rumination, procrastination, and a sense of shame, an unwavering sense of shame, and that's other things. Then there's shaping, which works really well for me. Shaping is gradually working towards a desired goal via a stepwise process, using reinforcement to help guide the outcome. That's a train going by. I often have trains in my video because we live near the train line. So the rumbles are not thunder, it's a train. So shaping is really good for me because as somebody with my ADHD brain as well as the autism can mean I can get quite stuck on an idea and find it difficult to transition to different parts of a task. And ADHD can also mean that I flick around quite a lot and I struggle to then take apart something that's a big picture into segmented steps. So if somebody can eat that elephant for me piece by piece and present me with a piece, that's a horrible analogy. I know I would never eat an elephant, but there is a saying that the only way to eat an elephant, because it's a big thing, is piece by piece. Same with tasks. So by shaping, by gradually working towards the desired goal, the important thing for me also here is I've always been a person who needs to know the end picture. Where are we going? What's the direction? So shaping is a management tool. Having the ability to apply that management tool in a situation that's directed is another skill that not everybody has, because not everybody is able to actually understand what direction this is going in or what is the goal. But that for me is really important. So somebody who can teach me by shaping, by breaking down a skill and reminding me of the direction and the goal is going to get good results for me, and I'm going to feel good about myself. There's two more. I'll put this one first. So redirection is basically re-engaging an individual in a more desired outcome to avoid challenging or unwanted behaviour. This is a strategy that's often used with younger children, especially when we as parents, and I did this with my children, notice that the child is becoming dysregulated. So it might be that we can catch them and nip something in the bud. So you're not denying their emotions, you're preventing them from boiling over by quickly inserting yourself in a situation and putting them in a calmer environment, or giving them something to take their mind off it. Maybe they fell over and had a hurt on their leg or something, and it's just, you're getting the ice pack, you're sitting them down, but they keep on focusing on it, and you can see that it's just a scratch. So you might give them a little toy to cuddle or a lollipop, or give them a physical hug, or start telling them a story or something, because it just helps. That's redirection, and that can be useful, but again, with an autistic brain that's quite monotropic and stuck, it can be really hard for me, and when somebody's trying to redirect me at the wrong moment, it can feel extremely invalidating and even more discombobulating, to be honest. It can make me lose my place, or can contribute to me shutting down, actually, because it's instead of it being something to help me, it starts to be taken in as another demand or another thing I've got to process. So in some ways I'm better off on my own, but as a kid it might have been different. The last thing is one I'm going to lean into a lot more for the rest of the video, and that's behavioural management as an actual thing. So we're going into behavioural management, and that's where your people pleasing, your masking, and a thing called conditioning come in. So this is not teaching so much, but this is actually more around the behaviour as a whole as the goal. You want to make this person something they're not, or something different. So role modelling, you're essentially saying, well, you're focused on the skill and learning the skill, but the individual is going to do it their own way. Or no, they're not. They're going to want to do it your way, but they're going to retain their individuality. Behavioural management is really about starting to get in and changing the whole person. So you're going beyond just the behaviour and you're actually talking to the individual, and that's why that's quite difficult and dangerous. So behavioural management comes from a place where a behaviour happens, whatever it is, So that's step one. Step two is the behaviour is judged in the negative, usually. So, oh, that person's done something. We don't like that. I don't like that. The individual doesn't like that. So then three, there has to be, there's a strategy to correct the behaviour that's engaged. So there has to be a strategy engaged. Now I'm focusing on behavioural management, like I said, because this is where it's assuming something, there's a judgment of the self, not just the behaviour. So while it's saying it's behavioural management, what I'm taking it to mean in this is that this is a critique of the self. So it's not just, oh, you know, don't pick your nose in public. That's not what we do. It's you're a terrible person for picking your nose in public. How dare you do that? That's a shameful behaviour. You're never going to do that again. I would never do. And all of that sort of different sensory, the different somatic sensations that go through your head when you hear those two things. So with behavioural management as adults, especially as late diagnosed, and this is where my perspective, I suppose, really comes in, is that it's talking to our inner child. So all of us have this thing as an inner child, because we don't just have an inner child. I think we only talk about the inner child, but we have the inner child, we have the inner teenager, we have all of these versions of ourselves still within, like a little, like those babushka dolls that go inside of each other. We're all there. But behavioural management strategies, behaviour happens, the behaviour is judged in the negative because it's got to be corrected, and then a strategy to correct the behaviour is enacted or engaged. Talking to our inner child, or our part of ourself that's triggered, or that's at least activated. I should not say triggered, because triggered is very specific to PTSD, and that is relevant for me, but it won't be relevant for everyone. It's a very strong reaction that goes out of proportion to the situation, whereas engaging or clicking on is relevant. Something's gone wrong, what is it? But it involves a questioning of who we are. So one of the things, this is the sort of thought process that I'm finding helpful for me. So when a behavioural management opportunity comes up, a behaviour's happened and the behaviour is judged in the negative, either by myself or another, it's like, question, who is the judge? Who is judging this is wrong? That matters. Is it me? Is it someone else? If it's someone else, is the judge being fair? That's the second part. Is the judge being fair? Are they even entitled to judge this? Asking a lot of those questions of the judge, making sure that we're not giving somebody some power that doesn't deserve it, or hasn't got our best motivations in mind. And that's the next thing. Is the judgment and correction directed towards my growth or my control, or controlling me? So there'll be people in our lives that might notice a behaviour from us and that are judging it or intervening, and we feel a little bit judged, but they're doing it for our best interests, and it's maybe in an area of a skill where we have a disability like I do, or a deficit because we just haven't learned this yet. There are judges out there that are there for a purpose, and they're there to restore harmony and maintain your reputation and make sure that you've got another opportunity to get back in the game and do it again. So not all judgment is bad, but we have to question, who is the judge? Are they being fair? And is that judgment directed towards my growth and my protection of my unique, beautiful self, or is it something that they're doing to control me? Can't be bothered with this outburst or this situation, or it's abhorrent to them, it's appalling and they just don't like it, or it makes them feel bad about themselves, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, but that's an important. The next thing is then to stop thinking about them, because we've so far judged them back. They judge us, we judge them. That's natural to some degree, but it's not always helpful if we stop there. So then we have to come into our bodies. Am I feeling safe? Am I feeling supported and protected in this moment, in this correction? Am I willing to receive this correction from that person? Is this the right time? So really considering myself in that moment. And finally, am I sitting in my power, or do I feel disempowered by this intervention in any way? I'm talking here about the adult self, and the adult self who might be reflecting on or having put themselves in a position where their younger self, or their less resolved self has acted or let something out in public. And again, it's without shame. This can be just something that has then been judged and picked up by another. So it's really, really important that we don't turn into our own judge and going, oh, not again, why do you always do this, you're such a pain in the neck, yeah, you're never gonna do this, you always stuff it up. That kind of black and white thinking and self-degradation is not helpful. So then it becomes the judge we take inside, and that's something that we are taught to do a lot when we are traumatized as young people. And it's impossible to become somebody who's 47, 46, 47 and not know they're autistic, or just find out without having some of that trauma in the cupboard. So we learn how to behave, and if we're lucky and if we're skilled enough, we will be able to behave in a way that's true to our own values, that is in honour of our unique, beautiful selves, and that is acceptable enough to other people that it doesn't become a problem for us, at least not most of the time. So we're not going out and having people correct us and intervene, and we're not doing that self-monitoring all ourselves. We're just going out there and being ourselves, and it's great, but that doesn't always happen. And I have found that for me, that self-judgment and their judgment and the either overt or covertly from others has been a big contributor to the mental health situation that I found myself in now, really still at the tail end of, which is the anxiety and the fear and the CPTSD. It's not always safe to show up as our authentic self. So even if we've been on this big growth journey and that we feel like we know ourselves quite well and we've accepted ourselves as we are and we're very accepting of that and we have beautiful people around us, it's not always possible to do that. There are various things that come in, various factors, because we're not living in an isolated bubble. It can be things like gender that make us have to be mindful or hide certain elements of ourselves when we're in some situations to keep ourselves safe. It might be our political or religious beliefs, or our culture, our sexuality, our disability, especially invisible disabilities. It's not always safe to disclose those. We might be financially vulnerable and be reliant on certain things and really not want to upset the apple cart. We might have an ethnicity that causes us challenges in certain environments that in others not so much. So it's not always safe to be our authentic self. So this learning how to regulate our behaviour and keep ourselves safe when we're doing it to ourselves, which we have to do throughout life, and when others are doing it on our behalf or to us without our consent sometimes, we do need to know how to judge that. How do we evaluate that input so that we can keep our own growth and our own safety first and foremost? So it doesn't matter where that's coming from, even when it's coming from myself, that we have this checks and balance in place so that we don't run away with our self-criticism and becoming all the negative things that are out there. But like I said, it's not always a bad thing to mask, and this came from that, to mask or to rein in or to control certain elements of ourselves, or to minimize certain elements of ourselves when we're out in public or in certain environments, because it can be a survival strategy. What can be damaging is when we don't know we're doing it, when we're doing it because we feel that we're the problem or that we're deficient or defective in some way. It's also important to note that not everybody has a clearly defined sense of who they authentically are. So not everybody has that core to return back to, and that was certainly true of myself. I knew myself well enough to, I would say that I was a bit more rebellious, that I knew what I didn't like, and but when it came to actually, well that's what you don't like and that's what you're running from, or that's what you're trying to avoid, but where are you going? And for me, that didn't become so much of a problem until more recently, so when my children were getting older and didn't need me as a mother so much, because in most of my life up to that point, so up to my early 40s, the trajectory was fairly external. You know, you're a kid, you're a teenager, you're at uni, you have to get your first job, you get married, you get a house, then you have your babies and you're a mother, and it's not about you, and you put them first, and then all of a sudden you get to a ripe old age of, well, not really, I know that, but you get into your 40s and you're like, whoa, who am I? I like the same things now as I liked when I was a kid, and I've always had that. I've always had a good sense of some of that, you know, the bits and pieces that I like in my hobbies and whatnot. But on another level, I've been totally disconnected from that, and that speaks to me having really poor, like I have really poor boundaries, and so for me, it wasn't sort of the big picture thing of losing track of who I am or pretending to be someone I'm not. I've always been quite similar. You know, people would say I'm quite solid that way, and I've had a lot of continuity that way. But where I struggled was in the everyday things, the little things, you know, what do you want for dinner type of things, the how do you want to run your day type of things. That was for me the big things, and not knowing authentically, not necessarily who I was, but why these things were important to me, and what would I choose if I didn't have to consider, if I wasn't considering other people. So for me, that late diagnosis came at a time when I was in the first time in my whole entire life that I was actually in a position to put myself first, and I had no clue how to do that. It's also important at this point to say that we're not a generation that's becoming overly obsessed with ourselves. There's a lot of content now about this. There's a lot of mental health chat. There's a lot of late diagnosed stories coming out, and that's all fantastic. But to people who are not ready to receive that yet, and who might stumble across videos like mine, it can be really easy to sit there and go, oh my God, in my day, we just sucked it up. You know, suck it up buttercup type of thing, or you've got too much time on your hands, you're such a privileged person to be able to sit there and rant on about your own blah blah blah. This stuff is the most important stuff that we'll ever do in our life. It's more important than having an extra $1,000 in the bank, or $100,000 if you want to say about that, or having an extra property, or having a nice car, or having a manicured garden, even though I quite like a manicured garden personally. But this is the most important thing. We now, myself and people like me, are trying to grow ourselves up emotionally so that we don't hurt other people. Now that is really important, so that we don't hurt ourselves, so that we reach our full potential, and that we are the people that we were always meant to be. There is no greater good worth abandoning. There is no greater good out there. There is nothing else. There is nothing out there that we should be abandoning ourselves for. This is it. So yeah, that's why. So one of the behavioural management strategies that I think has really affected me and leaned heavily into like filling my cup with PTSD is, or complex PTSD, is conditioned behaviour. So being conditioned, and this happens by society, in families, in, again, religious groups, anywhere you can think of, anywhere and everywhere. And growing up for me in the 70s and 80s and then into the 90s, really, I think if you carry all three of those decades to a point, you know, there was a lot out there. Being conditioned to respond a certain way, or this is the way it is, suck it up type of mentality, was the norm. So again, these videos are a reflection of how I have responded to the norms of society in some way. And sometimes there was extraordinary things going on. So there might have been situations for me that were very different than the people or the norm experienced. But in general, the whole world was invalidating for people like me back there. I didn't even appear on the autism spectrum diagnosis, so I wouldn't have got a diagnosis. So yeah, I wasn't quite normal, but I wasn't that either. So you know, so I feel like I've been conditioned a bit like a Pavlov's dog. So where there was a behavioural standard that it's not about me. So one of the mantras that goes through my head every now and then when I'm having a downer thing is, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me. I internalised that so much that I had no sense of, like I said, I really started to struggle to know, well, what is a boundary? When we're talking about boundaries, is that to stop other people hurting us? Is that me saying, don't do that to me? It took me a long while to realise that a boundary is for myself, and it's to keep... I have to know what I want to know where to set my boundaries or my walls. So it's no, I prefer to go to bed at 9 o'clock and wake up at 6, but I prefer also to wake up at 6 but not start work until 9. So I'm going to say no to that opportunity, because that would mean I've got to wake up at 6 and start work at 7. That's me setting a boundary based on me knowing myself. It's not telling the other person not to even ask me that. Me having those problems comes from being conditioned. So I was conditioned. Conditioning is not about me. It doesn't consider me. It's not about me at all. It's about sucking it up like you're in the army, like you're in a military camp or you're in a prison. This is the rules, this is how it is, this is what you do. So for much of my life, I didn't realise that I often acted out of a conditioned response, was orientated towards people pleasing. And not all conditioned response will manifest that way, but mine did. It was that it kind of came from a place for me of apologising for myself, like saying sorry for taking up space, even not necessarily overtly, but that's how I felt. It's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, of course it's not about me. What do you need? What can I do? This sort of thing. A lot of anxiety and a real belief that my life was not about me. So I feel that I was conditioned in that way by a number of factors. This realisation that I'd been conditioned to people please was odd. It felt odd to me to realise that, and I actually felt a bit disgusted in myself because, like I said, I'm not a people person particularly. I'm certainly not that pro-social, and why on earth would I spend so much time and energy at my own expense to make people happy with me when it actually didn't really matter if I had a lot of friends. Like, I don't want people to hurt me. I'm not oppositional and defiant and anarchistic. I'm not an anarchist. And I don't enjoy, like some people enjoy the power of making other people feel uncomfortable. I don't. If I was honest and open and realistic about how I like to deal with other people, mostly I just don't want to deal with them, or I like to deal with them on a mutually respectful and on parity. I like people to have equity in a relationship. I like to foster that togetherness and that cooperation, which I think is really lovely, to be honest. So it really felt icky for me to realise that I've been a people pleaser in the past. And then it felt weird that I'd kind of come at it like a zombie. I felt like I didn't choose it, that it was just a chip or a glitch in my programming from a very young age, that this is how it is and this is how I should be. And I think that's multi-layered for me. It came from lots of different places. My top 2 people-pleasing behaviours that I'm really quite, actually I feel sick now just talking about it. It makes my stomach hurt and it makes my chest tight. But the first one was holding a self-concept that I'm flexible, adaptable and not needy, so that I am a robot, essentially. I will come in, I will do my thing, I will go, don't worry, I would say things to people like, oh yeah, I'm a cheap date, I don't drink a lot. Not to be disrespectful or degrading of myself, but as a positive. It's like, oh yeah, I don't drink much, I don't cost much, don't worry, it won't cost you much to be around me. Oh yeah, I'm quite self-contained. No, you won't even know I'm here. I clean up after myself. I perfected the art of being invisible and having no needs. And that goes on to this other thing. It's a hyper-independence because, so my people-pleasing was in this hyper-independence. But it's also these behaviours, again, we don't become something completely zombie-like. I chose these things to lean into subconsciously because it was easy for my autism. I recognised the patterns. I instinctively knew from trauma and being, degraded, I guess, in public a few times, that okay, I'll watch the patterns, I'll know what people need, I'll do what people need, and then they'll leave me alone. And that was the motivation. But then you do it so much that you completely bypass the part where you actually are present yourself and that you're allowed to take up space and have preferences. So that was that coming to that realization in my 40s felt like, wow, that's bad. So the last sort of thing I want to do, or not quite the last, but one of the things was explaining to you from my perspective, from my personal reflections, how I feel this masking, people pleasing and conditioning sort of come in. I want to make sure that people understand that all 3 of them should be paused to, they are behavioural management strategies that can cost us and do cost us. So we should be mindful of that and be prepared to stop, at least for a little while, and consider the motivations and work back and really untangle that behaviour to see where it comes from and whether it is actually a pro-growth strategy for us. I won't read out this actually now because it's a lot of words, but the slide is there. You can screenshot it and have a look. So to recap there, the behaviours, as I said, that's caused me most trouble in my life have their origins more in conditioning rather than in masking. The masking things that I chose and that I experimented with were generally my choice, and I then worked out whether to engage or disengage, or to engage a little bit sometimes and then to tweak it to suit me. So I felt empowered in that, and the whole being able to mask, the masking that I recognised before I knew I was autistic helped me along and filled a gap for me. Since becoming autistic, since receiving my diagnosis, I should say, there has been things that I know this is what autistic people do. So for example, one of them, like wearing headphones on a train to block out some of the noise, you don't even have to listen to music. I had no idea that was a thing. So for me, I wouldn't put headphones on a train even though I was feeling quite overstimulated, because I didn't want the overstimulation of listening to music. I didn't realise that you can just put them on and not have anything on, and it does dampen the sound. And I was supposed to be intelligent, but that's how it is. I'm not used to thinking about myself, to thinking about my needs, just for the pure sake of having needs. Conditioning doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that's what I'm saying. It's really important to follow those threads down and discover why, because that conditioning is, for me, part of the trauma. The trauma is outside of the autism diagnosis, but it's not. It comes hand in hand a lot of the time when you're late diagnosed. So there's a lot to go on there, and it's important to realise that as humans are complex. So watching a video like this, I'm telling you a lot, but I can't tell you everything. It would take too long and be boring and nobody would watch, not even me. But I'm telling you enough to kind of get a full pattern. But humans are complex, so some of this might resonate with you, some of it might not. Your threads might go in a different direction, be a different colour, be a different strength. That's fine. That is normal. That is actually normal. And that is basically what I kind of wanted to say, that when getting my diagnosis, I got a little book with my diagnosis, Now You're Autistic. I can't remember what it's called, it's up here somewhere. It's a book about being a late diagnosed autistic person, and it's really good. So getting that diagnosis, receiving my book, having that validation from the medical and psychiatric community felt kind of good, because it felt like I had been given the key to find my way home. But the way home is in myself, because we're all different, we all have different triggers, and we can be all quite complex, and that's a good thing. So this is not here to diagnose or to explain your situation, it's here to explain mine. But through explaining mine and my process, my hope for you, for society, is that we all hold each other with a bit more compassion, and that we increase our level of curiosity around this sort of stuff, and that we can support each other to become the people that we really should be, without that putting in that desire to fix it for other people, show them, tell them what's wrong, enforce a narrative on them, or have them shut down because it's inconvenient for us. There's going to be people out there who do make you feel uncomfortable. I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of this video, and I hope you watch part 1 as well, which is wherever it is.